What's up, Rolando students? Dakota here. Diving into our new series. And to introduce that, I got a couple of questions for you, and just to figure out like where we at, right? So the first real big one here is, how many of you guys know what a prophet is? Raise your hands. That's right. I am here alone. There are no hands raised. I'm gonna assume you raised your hand in your home. Counts. So with that, guys, if you don't know what a prophet is, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but the biggest thing is that we're called to be a modern day prophet. I know it sounds crazy, right? But as we start talking about it, it's going to make a lot more sense. So how are we called to be a prophet? Where do you see that, right? There's two passages I want to talk right at the very beginning, and then as we dive through, we'll talk a little bit more. And the first one, the real big one here, would you say that we're called to live like Jesus? Yeah. Why? 1 John 2, verse 6. 1 John 2, verse 6. It says, "And the one who says he remains in him should walk just as he walked." Our whole idea when we're following God's commands, right, is that this is how we know that we are in him. The one who says that he remains in him should walk just as he walked. So we're called to live and to look like Jesus. So when we think about that, anything that Jesus did, anything that he was, we're also called to that, right? And so, who was Jesus? How do we get this prophet? So Jesus bore the title of a prophet, right? We've all heard that, the great prophet. Some religions will even focus so highly on him being a prophet that they won't even admit his deity, but we admit the prophet piece and the deity. And why is that? Actually, if you turn all the way to the back end of your Bible, in Revelation, chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "And from Jesus, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth, to him who loves us and has set us free." Faithful witness. So, a faithful witness is a prophet, and we'll get more into that as we go through this teaching here. But the big thing is that Jesus was a faithful witness. Jesus was a prophet. And in our lives, we're called to be like Jesus. So we're actually called to be this modern day prophet. And so when we talk about this, it gets a little weird. It's like, so what does that even mean? And why does it matter? There's a lot behind it. But first, I want to make sure we understand what we're talking about. When I'm talking about a prophet, what are some things that come to mind? Yeah, that's right. There's nobody else in here. Well, I think of people like Jonah. I think of fortune teller. Yeah, so we have a lot of different ideas, right? So a lot of us will think of people like Jonah or Isaiah or Ezra or Ezekiel, and they're these famous prophets who did some really cool and sometimes some really crazy things, right? And for some of us, we're going to think about people like fortune tellers or people who read the tea leaves. You know, this idea of telling the future, and, you know, it would be the equivalent of, you know, you're a modern day prophet, so you should go to your mom and dad and tell them exactly what tomorrow looks like. And to be real, half of you would probably be right, because it's going to look like doing absolutely nothing because we're in quarantine. But you get what I'm saying, right? So a prophet is not tied solely to this idea of fortune telling or foretelling or foreknowledge. In fact, for the most part, that wasn't even part of the job description. When we look at a prophet, what we have to look into is the idea of the faithful witness, right? And so, what did the prophets have in common? When we read through the Bible, what did the prophets have in common, including Jesus? They came in the name of the Lord. They came from humble beginnings, and they came in the name of the Lord. Now, with Jesus, he's one of the few that we could consider a prophet that actually has a lineage behind him, right? For the most part, when we look at the prophets in the Old Testament, and God called Isaiah, and occasionally it might be son of blank. But for the most part, it's about just the God calling, right? Whereas with like the kings and other important figures in the Bible, we see this genealogy unfolding of all their father of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, like all these names, right, to give lineage and to put importance on that. But instead with the prophets, it was that they were coming in the name of the Lord. Their authority wasn't given by their family. Their authority was given by God. Right? So they weren't going in. It wasn't about telling the future. It wasn't about this whole like let's predict the end times, doom, gloom, etc. It was about telling people what God had to say with authority given by God. And so, in the same way, Jesus was a prophet. He was this faithful witness. He came down. He told people what God had to say. But instead of just with the authority of God, he was God. He was the one to tell them at that point. And so throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus as this ultimate witness of who God is and what God has to say, and living it out in his life. And so when we look back into the Old Testament, we see again that sort of formula for the prophets. We see a bunch of them falling into this, you'll see the famous words, thus saith the Lord, right? And so then everything that they say is meant to be, this is what God has told me, whether that's in a dream or a vision, or just his voice, like whatever it is, that's what, they're coming with that authority. And so as Jesus followers, we're called to live as he lived, which means that we're called to be these faithful witnesses, to say, thus saith the Lord, right? We're coming from, the common ground. We're normal people, right? There's no lineage behind us. There's no like, excuse me, I am Queen Elizabeth's son, Prince Henry, and I come telling you that the Lord is... No, it's, my name's Dakota. Y'all don't care who my family is. This is what God says in his word, right? And so it's this idea that we're meant to be a witness the same way as the prophets were then. And so how do we do that? And so when we look at a prophet, there are 3 words that come to mind that really narrow down what they do. And so over the next few weeks, that's what we're going to be diving into. We're going to take a week at a time and say, okay, this is the first part of the prophetic task. So one of the biggest things that you need to understand is that as we go through this, these are steps. This isn't something where some of you just do one, the next one is the other. This is something that's meant to be done in a series of steps throughout the relationship, throughout your whatever, like people you're talking to, whether it's peers, family, etc. The idea is that this is something that it's stages, right? You don't do one and you're done. And so this week we're specifically talking about, so the 3 words are reality, grief, and hope. Reality, grief, and hope. As a prophet, as your prophetic task even today is to speak into reality, to speak into grief, and to speak into hope. What does that look like? What are we talking about? So this week specifically, we're going to be talking about reality. And we're saying that the prophets spoke into the reality of a situation. Their whole goal is to go in and break down any sort of ideology, any sort of created truths, and bring in the real truth, right? Bring in the reality. It's about the root. It's taking them to the root of the problem and breaking down the different concepts to show people what the root of the issue is. So for sometimes this is going all the way back and saying, dude, this is all happening because of your sin, and pointing out what the sin is, right? So for a lot of us, these prophetic tasks are more to do with other fellow believers than it is to do with non-believers. Sometimes when it comes to this stuff, it's pointing out you're not looking at the right good. You're not looking at this in the right way. Reality is shaped. Each one of us shapes our own reality in our head, right? And we can't deny the fact that everyone tries to shape reality their own way. But as one of our tasks now, as Jesus followers, is to be this prophetic task is to bring forth reality. And so reality can be really hard to grasp. Right now, how many of you guys are struggling with reality? Yeah, every day. Every day. Why? Because quarantine sucks. COVID-19 sucks. Being at home sucks. Never thought I'd say being at home sucks. I thought I'd like being stay at home. No, this is not for me. And a lot of you are finding the same things, right? And it's hard. We don't want to deal with it, right? And so part of our task, though, is to deal with it and to help others deal with it, to point out the reality. Yeah, this sucks, but guess what? God is still going to do amazing things. He's opened up new times for me to actually spend time with him in his word. For some of us, we're able to spend time crafting or working on our crafts, like on things that we're good at, on our skills, and take time to perfect those things that we wouldn't have had otherwise. There's good coming out of this that God is intending for us. That's the reality. The reality is that we have the ability now to love people in ways that we've never been able to, and different ways to connect, things like that. The reality is there's more going on than just you're stuck at home, life sucks. And so in the same way now, our job is to go through and to help people find reality. And this is going to be a hard task, because for a lot of us, we look at it and we say, well, God calls me to love my neighbor. And this doesn't sound like love. This sounds harsh. This sounds sucky. Like, what do you mean this is what I have to do? And I'm going to be honest with you, it's going to be hard for you to do this because it can feel like you're, because it feels like some people are going to feel betrayed when you try to show them reality. They're going to be like, why are you fighting me on this? And so our whole idea here is that we're a wake-up call. And it's hard. It's not going to be easy every time. There's going to be times where it is easy. There's going to be times where people hear you and they're like, oh, wow, you're right. And then there's going to be times people hear you and they're like, are you kidding me? What? And they're not going to want to hear what you have to say. And so when we're looking at this, what we have to remember is that we have to do it like Jesus, right? And so how do we respond to this call? So we don't go up to every single person out there and start pointing out reality immediately. No, that's just not how you do it. Right? When we look at the prophets, there were times that happened, but let's look at how extreme the Israelites were responding, right? A lot of it is trying to help people see the reality and let them dawn on it that is the reality. Finding ways to communicate it in grace and in mercy, so that way that someone can, it brought to their attention in a way that they see the reality without you having to say, hey, you're wrong, here's the right reality. A perfect example of this, honestly, the prophet Nathan. A lot of you guys are probably like, who? How many of you are familiar with the story of David and Bathsheba? Okay, we all know, finds her attractive, does his kingly thing. She gets pregnant, brings her husband back to try to make it seem like he was the one that got her pregnant. That didn't work, so he had her husband killed so he could marry her. It's crazy, right? Immediately after that, in 2 Samuel chapter 12. So go ahead and open your Bibles. Yep, Bibles. 2 Samuel chapter 12. So in 2 Samuel chapter 12, we see Nathan, right? So Nathan is a prophet during this time that is probably seeing more of David than he even wants to. Because David during this time, there's some iffy stuff that's going on. All right, so the Lord sends Nathan to David. And when he arrived, he said to him, there were 2 men in a certain city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except for one small lamb that he had bought. It lived and grew up with him and his children. It shared his meager food and drank from his cup. It slept in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now keep in mind, this is the poor man with his lamb, right? Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man could not bring himself to take one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare for the traveler who had come to him. So instead he takes the poor man's lamb and prepared it for his guest. Wow. Imagine like your favorite animal, and then somebody comes over and says, I'm going to need that so that way I can feed it to this dude who's visiting me. Huh. I like my dogs too much. Not that I have any right now, but in the past I've liked my dogs too much. You know what I mean? So David was infuriated with the man, and he said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. Because he has done this thing and shown no pity. He must pay 4 lambs for that lamb. He wants this guy to return to the poor man 4 times what he took because of how messed up it is. And he deserves to die. That's the reality of the situation, right? That's how David is taking it. Nathan replies to David, you are this man. This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms, and I gave you the house of Israel and Judea. And if that was not enough, I would have given you even more. Why then have you despised the command of the Lord by doing what I consider evil? You struck down Uriah the Hittite, so that's the husband of Bathsheba, right? With the sword, and took his wife as your own. You murdered him with an Amorite sword. Now therefore the sword will never leave your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own wife. And this is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on you from your own family. I will take your wives and give them to another before your very eyes. He will sleep with them publicly. You acted in secret, but I will do this before all of Israel and in broad daylight. Whew. So, hopefully you're not going to have to be the one that, like Nathan, having to go and speak into the situation. But regardless, see how Nathan brought in the reality. He didn't go in and say right from the beginning, hey, this is what God said. You are this man, and start breaking it down. No. He says, hey, hypothetically, this is what happened. And he gives him this story that entices a reaction out of David and then says, oh, David, by the way, that's what you did. Maybe not literally, maybe not verbatim. That's what you did. And so the biggest thing is that the reality can be gut-wrenching, right? Like, David was like, I want this man dead, paid 4 times. Like, that's a big deal for him to come to that realization, right? And so what we're talking about doing now, in our modern day, our job is to go in and be like Nathan, to find ways to tell a story, to bring people into reality and allow them to realize what's going on, and then make sure that by the end of it, they understand this is the reality for you, right? That they're not excluded from it. And so with that, guys, our job is now, as a modern day prophet, to do this with our peers, with our families. Don't start doing this till we finish talking about the other stages here, right? But start thinking about what does that look like, and start thinking about different ways. What I recommend doing too is looking through the gospel and finding examples of this. A lot of these for Jesus are going to come across as, when he's telling parables, to try to help people understand the reality of the situation. A perfect example is with him and the rich young ruler, where the rich young ruler, he wants to be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven, because of the obstacle of his money, right? And so he's trying to bring that reality through a story, through a more gracious way than just saying, dude, you're the problem because of your money. It's just not going to work. And so over the next couple weeks, we're going to start diving into what does it look like to then bring in the grief conversation and the hope conversation as our prophetic tasks. Guys, I miss you guys. I miss being able to gather in real life. This whole digital thing is, I'm assuming for you like it is for me, it's weird. But I am thankful that we can at least do this. Guys, just know that you're missed, you're loved, and you're prayed often. We'll catch you later.